Okay. Bela Lugosi never made a movie for Monogram called The Monster Maker. But he should have. PRC, Producers Releasing Corporation, made a movie by that title in 1944, but I've never been able to watch it. I feel so bad about the awful things J. Carrol Naish does to Ralph Morgan. No, Bela would have been perfect as the lead in this adaptation of The Monster Maker by W.C. Morrow, an author of rather grisly short fiction. I first encountered this story in the Bernhardt J. Hurwood collection, Monsters Galore, and it has stayed with me for over 50 years. So, without further ado, here's Monogram Pictures' 1943 production of my adaptation of The Monster Maker. That's Monogram Pictures, with Bela in the lead role as the Doctor. But I won't be imitating Bela's voice as I tell the story. However, no Bela video would be complete without at least one impersonation. So here goes from Murders in the Rue Morgue, 1932. My name is Dr. Miracle, and I am not a sideshow charlatan. So if you think this is usual carnival hocus pocus, go to the box office and get your money back. Okay. No more, I promise. And now, The Monster Maker. And the cast? The surgeon, Bela Lugosi. The young man, Dwight Fyre. The wife, Elizabeth Russell. The detective, Tristam Coffin. And the captain, Kenneth Harlan. One evening, a young man of refined appearance, but evidently suffering great mental stress, presented himself at the residence of a singular old man who was known as a surgeon of remarkable skill. The house was a queer and primitive brick affair, entirely out of date, and tolerable only in the decayed part of the city in which it stood. Although he was a surgeon of rare skill, his practice was almost nothing, for few who knew of his great ability were brave enough to ignore the ghoulish stories that were whispered concerning him and his experiments in vivisection. The young man who presented himself was a handsome fellow, yet of evident weak character and unhealthy temperament, sensitive and easily exalted or depressed. "Are you the doctor?" asked the young man. Yes, come in," the doctor replied. The young man entered. The old surgeon closed the door and carefully locked it. "This way," he said, advancing to a rickety flight of stairs. The young man followed. The surgeon led the way up the stairs, turned into a narrow, musty-smelling corridor at the left, and at the farther end opened a door and beckoned his visitor to enter. The young man found himself in a pleasant room, furnished in antique fashion. "Sit down," said the old man, placing a chair so that its occupant should face a window looking out upon a dead wall about 6 feet from the house. He threw open the blind, and a pale light entered. He then seated himself near his visitor, directly facing him. "Well?" he asked. The young man shifted uneasily in his chair. I have come to see you," he finally stammered, "because I'm in trouble." "Ah. Yes, you see, I have given it up." "Ah. That's it, given it up," said the visitor. He took from his pocket a roll of banknotes, and with the utmost deliberation, he counted them out upon his knee. $5,000, he calmly remarked. "That is for you. It's all I have, but I presume—" I imagine. No, that is not the word. Assume, yes, that's the word. Assume that 5,000 is sufficient for what I want you to do. The surgeon's lips curled disdainfully. What do you want me to do? The young man rose, looked around with a mysterious air, approached the surgeon, and laid the money across his knee. Then he stopped and whispered 2 words in the surgeon's ear. These words produced an electric effect. The old man started violently. Then, springing up, he caught his visitor angrily and transfixed him with a look that was as sharp as a knife. I do not want your money, he said. You are simply foolish. You think you are in trouble. Well, you don't know what trouble is. Your only trouble is that you are insane. You should surrender yourself to the authorities and be sent to a lunatic asylum for proper treatment. The young man keenly felt the intended insult, and his eyes flashed dangerously. You old dog! You insult me thus, he cried. Grand airs these! You give yourself! Virtuously indignant old murderer, you! Don't want my money, eh? When a man comes to you himself and wants it done, you fly into a passion and spurn his money. But let an enemy of his come and pay you, and you are only too willing. How many such jobs have you done in this miserable old hole? It is a good thing for you the police have not run you down and brought spade and shovel with them. Do you know what is said of you? Do you think you have kept your windows so closely shut that no sound ever escaped? Where do you keep your infernal implements? He had worked himself into a high passion. His voice was hoarse, loud and rasping. His eyes, bloodshot, started from their sockets. His whole frame twitched and his hands shook. But he was in the presence of a man infinitely his superior. Sit down, commanded the surgeon. The fury left the visitor, who, weak and overcome, fell into a chair. Meanwhile, a peculiar light had appeared in the old surgeon's face, the dawn of a strange idea. Taking a piece of paper and a pencil, the surgeon carefully wrote answers to such questions as the visitor's name, age, place of residence, occupation, and the like, with similar inquiries concerning his parents, together with other particular matters. Does anyone know you came to this house? No. You swear it? Yes. But your prolonged absence will cause alarm and lead to search. I have provided against that. How? By leaving a note in the post announcing my intention to drown myself. The river will be dragged. What then? Asked the young man, shrugging his shoulders. Rapid undercurrent, you know. A good many are never found. There was a pause. Are you ready? Asked the surgeon. Perfectly. The answer was cool and determined. Have you a choice in the method? He asked. Yes. I want to be put to sleep. Do you desire any subsequent disposition? No. Only nullification. Simply a blowing out, as of a candle in the wind. A sense of your own safety may suggest the method. I leave it to you. No delivery to your friends? None whatever. Another pause. Did you say you are quite ready? Asked the surgeon. Quite ready. And perfectly willing? Anxious. Then wait a moment. With this request, the old surgeon rose to his feet and softly closed the door and locked it. Then he closed the window blinds and locked them. This done, he opened a door leading into an adjoining room, which, though it had no window, was lighted by means of a small skylight. The young man watched closely. A strange change had come over him. He was ecstatic now. The opening of the second door disclosed, directly under the skylight, an operating table. A glass case against the wall held surgical instruments of every kind. Hanging in another case were human skeletons of various sizes. In sealed jars, arranged on shelves, were monstrosities of divers kind, preserved in alcohol. There was also a mannequin, a stuffed cat, a desiccated human heart, and a large assortment of drugs and chemicals. As well, there was a lounge which could be opened to form a couch. The surgeon opened it and moved the operating table aside, giving its place to the lounge. "Come in," he called to his visitor. The young man obeyed. "Take off your coat." He did. "Lie down on that lounge." In a moment, the young man was stretched at full length, eyeing the surgeon, who asked, "Have you ever had any irregularity of the heart?" "No." The answer was prompt, but it was immediately followed by a quizzical look in the speaker's face. "I presume," he added, "you mean by your question that it might be dangerous to give me a certain drug. Under the circumstances, however, I failed to see the point of your question." The surgeon was taken aback, but explained that he did not wish to inflict any unnecessary pain. The doctor then examined the young man's pulse. "Wonderful," he exclaimed. "Why?" "It's perfectly normal." "Because I am wholly resigned. Indeed, it has been long since I knew such happiness." "You have no desire to retract?" "None whatever." The surgeon took a large brown bottle and poured some liquid into a small drinking glass and handed it to the young man. "Take this." The young man raised himself and took the glass. He did not show any sign of nervousness. He drank the liquid to the last drop, returning the glass with a smile. "Ah, it does me good," he said. The surgeon sat down upon the edge of the lounge and took his visitor's wrist, counting the pulse. "How long will it take?" the young man asked. 10 minutes. To have passed." "Ah, only 8 minutes more. Delicious. Delicious. What was that? Is that water? Trickling? Dripping? Doctor!" "Well?" Thank you. Dripping. Doctor!" "Well?" "Doctor!" "Past hearing," muttered the surgeon. "Doctor!" "And blind." Response was made by a firm grasp of the hand. "Doctor!" "And numb." "Doctor!" The old man watched and waited. Dripping. The last drop had run. There was a sigh and nothing more. The surgeon laid down the hand. "The first step," he gloated, rising to his feet. "The first step is the most difficult, yet the simplest. A providential delivery into my hands of that for which I have hungered for 40 years. No withdrawal now. It is possible. It is possible because scientific, rational. If I succeed, I shall succeed. I will succeed. He made a careful examination of his visitor. Splendid specimen, he softly exclaimed. Every organ sound, every function perfect. Fine, large frame, well-shaped muscles, strong and sinewy, capable of wonderful development, if given opportunity. I have no doubt it can be done. Already I have succeeded. With a dog. While talking, he replaced the operating table under the skylight, selected a number of surgical instruments, prepared certain drug mixtures, and arranged water, towels, and all the accessories for a tedious surgical operation. Suddenly he burst into laughter. "Poor fool," he exclaimed. "Paid me $5,000 to kill him. Didn't have the courage to snuff his own candle. You thought you were dying, poor idiot. Allow me to inform you, sir, that you are as much alive at this moment as ever you were in your life. But it will be all the same to you. You shall never be more conscious than you are now, and for all practical purposes, you are dead. By the way, how should you feel without a head?" Oh, but that's a sorry joke. He lifted the unconscious form from the lounge and laid it upon the operating table. About 3 years afterwards, the following conversation was held between a captain of police and a detective. "She may be insane," suggested the captain. "I think she is." "And yet you credit her story?" "I do." "Singular?" "Not at all. I myself have learned something." "What?" "You have heard those queer stories of her husband? Well, they're all nonsense, with one exception. He has performed some wonderful surgical operations, and he is almost insanely enthusiastic on the subject of surgery, especially experimental surgery. And with an enthusiast, there is hardly such a thing as a scruple. It is this that gives me confidence in the woman's story." "You say she appeared to be frightened." "Doubly so. First, she feared that her husband would learn of her betrayal of him. Second, the discovery itself terrified her." "But her report is very vague," argued the captain. "She heard the sounds distinctly, although what she thinks she saw is preposterous. There are many peculiar little circumstances. He has eaten with her but few times during the last 3 years, and nearly always carries his food to his private rooms. She says that he either consumes an enormous quantity, throws much away, or is feeding something that eats prodigiously. He keeps the door to these rooms carefully locked. In fact, he has had the doors doubled and otherwise strengthened, and has heavily barred a window that looks from one of the rooms upon a dead wall a few feet distant. And then there's this page, which she managed to tear from one of his notebooks. Hence this marvelous veracity, this insatiable hunger, this wonderful ravenousness, and also this strength that is becoming almost hourly Herculean, almost appalling. It is becoming a serious... Narrow escape today. By some means, while I was absent, it unscrewed the stopper to the silver feeding pipe, which I have already herein termed the artificial mouth, and in one of its curious antics allowed all the contents to escape from its stomach through the tube. Its hunger then became intense, I may say furious. I placed my hands upon it to push it into a chair, when feeling my touch it caught me around the neck, and would have crushed me to death instantly had I not slipped from its powerful grasp. Thus I always had to be on my guard. "What does it mean?" asked the captain. The detective shrugged. "What do you propose to do?" "Make a raid." "Do you want a man?" "3. The strongest men in your district." "Why? The surgeon is old and weak." "Nevertheless, I want 3 strong men, and for that matter, prudence really advises me to take 20. At 1 o'clock the next morning, a cautious scratching sound might have been heard in the ceiling of the surgeon's operating room. Shortly afterwards, the skylight sash was carefully raised. The detective peered into the opening. Nothing could be heard. He cautiously lowered himself to the floor by a rope, and then stood for some moments listening. There was dead silence. He shot the slide of a dark lantern and swept the room with light. It was bare, with the exception of a strong iron staple and ring screwed to the floor in the center of the room with a heavy chain attached. The detective then turned his attention to the outer room. It was perfectly bare. Returning to the inner room, he called softly to the men to descend. While they were thus occupied, he re-entered the outer room and examined the door. A glance sufficed. It was kept closed by a spring attachment and was locked with a strong spring lock that could be drawn from the inside. "The bird has just flown," mused the detective. He noiselessly drew the spring lock, opened the door, and looked out into the hall. He heard a weird sound. It was as though a gigantic lobster was floundering and scratching in some distant part of the old house. Accompanying this sound was a loud whistling breathing and frequent rasping gasps. Startled out of a fitful slumber by the noise at her door, the surgeon's wife sprang from her bed. The idea of flight seized upon her, and she ran to the door. She drew the bolt and flung the door wide open, and then fled wildly down the passage, the appalling hissing and rasping gurgle ringing in her ears. The passage was in absolute darkness, and she had not taken a half-dozen steps when she tripped over an object on the floor. She fell headlong, encountering a large, soft, warm substance that writhed and squirmed, and from which came the sounds that had awakened her. Instantly realizing her situation, she uttered a shriek of terror. But then 2 prodigious arms closed upon her and crushed the life out of her. The scream aroused the detectives and the old surgeon. "It has come at last," he cried, springing from his bed. Snatching from the table a dimly burning lamp and a long knife, he dashed into the corridor. He heard the hissing sound and the clumsy floundering of an enormous living object advancing towards him. He turned up the light. "Wife!" he called. There was no response. The surgeon hurriedly advanced, the detectives following. He ran past a huge, shapeless object, sprawling, crawling, and floundering along, and arrived at the body of his wife. He gave one horrified glance at her face and staggered away. Then fury seized him. Clutching the knife firmly and holding the lamp aloft, he sprang towards the ungainly object in the corridor. It was then that the officers saw it, and the hideous sight caused them to pause. They saw what appeared to be a man, but was not a man. Hulking, awkward, shapeless, a squirming, lurching, stumbling mass, completely naked. It raised its broad shoulders to reveal it had no head. No head! No head, but a small metallic ball surmounting its massive neck. "Devil!" exclaimed the surgeon, raising the knife. "Hold there!" commanded the detective. The surgeon quickly raised his eyes and saw the 4 officers, and for a moment fear paralyzed his arm. "The police!" he hissed. Then, with a look of fury, he sent the knife into the squirming mass before him. The wounded monster sprang to its feet and wildly threw its arms about, emitting fearful sounds from the silver tube through which it breathed. The surgeon aimed another blow, but in his blind fury lost his caution and was caught in an iron grasp. The struggling threw the lamp to the floor, shattering it. The oil took fire, the corridor filling with flame. The wood in the house was old and dry, and the flames spread with great rapidity. The 4 officers turned and fled, barely escaping with their lives. In an hour, nothing remained of the mysterious old house but a blackened ruin. WSJ here. I hope you enjoyed this homage to the great B-horror movies of the past. If so, please share and drop a like. And let me know what you think in the comments. In particular, what you think of my casting of the production. Which actors would you have chosen instead? And please check out W.C. Morrow's original story. I've left a link to it in the description. I have left a link to it in the description. Learn to read your own scripts, Warren. I write and tell ghost stories and weird tales, so please consider subscribing if you enjoy being creeped out as much as I do. And remember, always stay hungry.